Got it. I think something messed up when you said that because it was like, it was like 3, 2, 1, clap. I was like, what the fuck? Hold up here. Hold up here.
I'm sure one of those will be. We can use one of those. Probably, maybe. So, welcome back, everybody, to the 36% with Brett and Adam.
Yes, after a very eventful second Democratic debate tonight.
Oh, after an eventful, I won't say very, after an eventful second debate.
Yeah, after I don't know, it was very, I'm not sure eventful is the right word for it. It was,
I wouldn't say it's the right word for it either. After a second Democratic debate, we're back with you, bringing some coverage and some analysis to what we just saw and what we hope to see going forward.
Yes. And as always, hot takes.
Oh, absolutely, the hot takes.
Brett, I think we should end every episode with just hot takes. That should be our closer.
I completely agree with you. That's really what the people are here for.
Oh yeah. All right.
So we have our coverage after this. Actually, I'll let you go ahead. I'll let you go ahead and explain it.
Yeah, no, so basically the debate ended about 24 minutes ago, and considering that Brett and I are working boys, we decided to do the podcast right now because we will not have time tomorrow, and we gotta meet those deadlines that we have self-imposed.
Yeah.
So.
And it's all fresh in our minds, and I'm staring at a screen of a bunch of candidates right now that I have just so many thoughts and feelings over. So
pretty much.
While it's all at the tippy top of our tongues, let's go ahead and get into it.
Yep. So how this is going to work is we are basically going to go down the list of candidates as they have appeared, and we will give our thoughts on the debate, how they performed, their performances, what we thought about it, and then we'll just wrap things up with some quick hot takes and get on the road. Off to Iowa.
Tight 30. Coming to you momentarily.
All right. So, Brett, start us off with what you thought. What were your thoughts going into the debate? What were your expectations, and how did things play out for you?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, we had mentioned on our previous podcast, the first night of debates, really the star of the show was Elizabeth Warren going into it. We saw that she was, by large, the number one vote getter out of the group, and so everyone kind of expected it to be the Elizabeth Warren show. Conversely, this was the night where we were all expecting a grand face-off between the top vote getters, notably Bernie, Biden, Buttigieg, Harris, in no particular order. So that first and foremost, I think, to me, set my expectations a lot higher. And for whatever reason, I think I had in my mind that we were actually going to get these conversations between these candidates, modeled after what we saw the previous night, of where it was a little bit more of a free-flowing conversation. I really had been geared for that. I'd been prepared for that, primed for that. Now, I was expecting to see Biden kind of flounder in his moderate position and struggle to rise above, because he's been holding on to this 35% polling lead above everyone else because of what a lot of us have assumed to be name ID, and there's probably a lot of credit to that. But I expected him to sink coming out of this debate through a lack of being able to differentiate himself and stand out in that capacity, and I expected this to be the time for Harris and Buttigieg and Gillibrand and Yang, the more verbal candidates, to kind of take this opportunity to have their voices be heard, and again to differentiate themselves. I think this is the debates of differentiation, and what we saw, I think, wasn't that. I think coming out of it, in my opinion, for what it's worth, I saw Biden cement, and not only cement, but justify his position as to being where he is, for better or worse. And then it was largely quiet. I think I preferred the first night's debate in terms of we got to hear alternative voices, but it was always centered around that there is an overarching problem, and that whoever the candidate is, they're going to have to address it. and everyone seemed relatively on the same page and headed in the same direction. To that, and for me, that was very hopeful. Whereas this debate seemed a little bit more of wrangling egos, which I think we should have seen coming into it, because obviously these are the top vote getters. It was always going to be more individual centric, and I was a little disappointed by that fact. And I will obviously go through how all the candidates did and what our final takeaways from all this was, but I certainly did not get the debate that I was expecting from this. And that's really my overarching opening statement.
Yeah, I mean, largely, I think that what I was expecting to see from people, I was expecting to see people go after Joe Biden, because he was there and present, and I expected, and I think we largely got that. I expected to see some of the lower, the people that obviously are polling at less than 1% breakout in interjecting and basically taking the shots that they could to become relevant, and I think that we saw a good amount of that as well. I think I was surely expecting the same old from Bernie Sanders, and we got that. And I think that's a conversation I think we'll probably have later. But largely, I think that it really speaks to what his purpose is on stage now. And so, but that we'll get that into that. And additionally, I also expected to see some of the more moderates, like Hickenlooper and Bennett and Swalwell. I expected to see them possibly start trying to differentiate themselves, not by going after Biden but going after Bernie, and that was a little more questionable. Besides Hickenlooper, who just freaking went for it. And I had absolutely no expectation for what the hell Marianne Williamson would say up there, but I surely wasn't disappointed. But I was not impressed with when because we saw a very different tone in this debate from yesterday's. Yesterday's was, despite de Blasio, there was, things were far more respectful, honestly. And there was, allowed for a little more substance and policy, I think, to actually seep out there. And, while things, stayed exciting and it was, good to watch and that kind of thing, I came out of this debate thinking that I wish that I heard more of the plans and more of the policies that actually do make these Democratic candidates worth being up there. And I think we got a little bit of that with healthcare, and I think we got maybe a touch of that with gun control. But I really don't think that we even came. I mean, a slight bit on again, like there was we had one little brief question for each of these topics, and the rest of the time it just was this infighting, and so I wasn't impressed with that. But anyways, let's get into the candidates. Let's talk about them. And Brett, who do you want to start out with?
Absolutely. So, in this debate, we had the other 10 Democratic candidates who qualified for the debate. Let's remember that there are 25 total. 10 were last night, 10 were tonight, 5 didn't make it. So in this debate, we were featuring, in no particular order, California Senator Kamala Harris, California Congressman Eric Swalwell, former tech CEO Andrew Yang, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, former Vice President Joe Biden, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and author Marianne Williamson. Each one of them had a role to play tonight. Of course, the top 5 vote getters from the group, as previously mentioned, Biden, Sanders, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, following up behind by Kirsten Gillibrand, Andrew Yang, Eric Swalwell, Hickenlooper, Williamson, and Bennett, pretty much in no particular order. We had a lot of words from Joe Biden. We don't have the actual counts yet because this is, as Adam mentioned earlier, 30 minutes after the election happened. But Jesus, if we thought the previous debate was going to be the Elizabeth Warren show, tonight was the Joe Biden show. I felt like they deferred back to him on more issues. And it wasn't necessarily because he is the policy leader or the visionary leader on any of these, but simply because he was Barack Obama's vice president, and we still look to Barack Obama as being the gold standard for the Democratic Party and for liberal policy, which I don't think there's a ton of fault in that, but I also don't think that's correct. So we saw the debates, or we had the debates open with statements from him, and it was largely controlled by the things that he said, forcing a lot of people to respond to him. As you mentioned earlier, we didn't have a ton of substantive conversation about the actual topics. Rather, it was about the visions that the candidates saw for the future, except for Joe Biden, who was forced to address a lot of things that was done in his past. And when you spend 40 some odd years in the Senate and then 8 years as a VP, you have quite the track record to refer to. However, he also was having to confront a lot of controversy during that time. As I mentioned at the top, I think Joe Biden had this opportunity to prove why he was the front runner, and I think he largely rose to that. But the more savvy voter, the more savvy listener also noticed that he was forced to defend a lot of his former positions, a lot of his former votes. And I think as we continue, that will kind of bite him in the ass. And I think his emphasis on taking the moderate position of him saying that I have worked with Mitch McConnell before and that I can do it again, and that I've been building bridges in the Senate for 40 some odd years, and as vice president I brought the Republicans to the table and we made deals. I think it's a crock of shit because he brought up the ban on assault weapons back in the 80s and 90s. We still have assault weapons. I mean, this is one of the big issues we're looking at now. And so he's going to continue to point to this track record as if it's something shiny to look at. But I think the people that are tuned in know that it's nonsensical. So I think while he'll probably enjoy continuation of his heady lead in the polls after tonight, I personally feel like he's not doing well enough to differentiate himself from the rest of the field. Those are really my thoughts on the former vice president.
Yeah. Well, I pulled up, I found some speaking times, and you're right. So Biden was the longest speaker tonight. I thought that, I mean, a large part of that is also because he was forced to do he was on the defense a lot about things. Mm-hmm. However, I think that there is a danger that a lot of the candidates face by going after Biden for certain things, especially because you're right. Joe Biden, has this very long track record of public service, and through that, those 4 decades, in public service, a lot has changed within politics. The Democratic Party of the 70s, when Biden was first elected to Congress, is very different than it is now. And I think the biggest question is how do we judge, positions that were, extremely favorable with the Democratic Party back then, and the decisions she made with how the Democratic fields, holds those positions now. Because, if you look at it, we don't judge, or at least many people do not hold, Obama to, back in, 2004, he came out against, he said something about, not supporting gay marriage or that kind of thing. However, we don't hold many of our politicians to that same kind of standard as we did then in 2010 when the Supreme Court ruled and then, they were all in favor of it and that kind of thing. I genuinely, there was a quick, I think 2015, but there was a very massive quick turnaround within this, even then, that we don't hold the same standard to. And so I think that it's interesting that is being applied to Biden now. And I think also a lot of people, I think that many voters, especially people, of slightly older generations that see, Joe Biden as being closely linked to Obama, which is in their eyes very favorable. and very favorable to many of us. And I think that largely his appeal of being one of the candidates most outspoken about the need for bipartisanship, even though we might not believe in it. I think many people still see Joe Biden as a pragmatic and an able politician that can achieve that. And I think largely this is the biggest thing we have to face and consider, is the fact that while, yes, these Democrats take issue with some of the things that Biden has done in his past, and certain aspects and policies he supported, like the Hyde Amendment and the school busing thing that was brought up by Kamala Harris today during the debate, which we'll get into. I think that it's important to note that he may face these challenges to that now, but if he can prove himself and overcome those kinds, the adversity that he might face and the criticism that he might face from Democrats on those issues and become the candidate, he is not going to be held responsible by any Republicans about those. He's not going to be attacked on those issues. Those issues are not going to be brought up. They're not going to be front and center. And I think largely it'll be very interesting to see how Joe Biden, I think, is largely a candidate that will do far better against a Republican than against other Democrats. And I think is one of his most important selling points, because I genuinely do believe that is something that people like Bernie Sanders don't have. That I think that Bernie stands out against Democrats, but when you put him up against a Republican, well, yeah, I mean, Bernie Sanders is, of course, a very talented debater and a great politician, and of course, like one of the most affluent liberals that we have. I think that it's very important to note that I truly think that for the large majority of the American people, they would come away more favorably watching a Joe Biden go against a Donald Trump than a Bernie Sanders. But
see, and that's where I'm going to push back a little bit, because I think Joe Biden, you bring up an excellent point. He gets raked over the coals for a bunch of things that liberals care about that hardline conservatives most likely would not take issue with. I think a Fox News correspondent gets gets criticized for bringing up favoring the Hyde Amendment. So it's not something that he's going to face on a debate stage opposite Donald Trump. However, it's getting there that is all of these candidates' problems. So we look at Joe Biden and we say, okay, there's this long, troubled track record that he has to reconcile for, and it doesn't seem like he's wanting to budge a whole lot. Someone in a similar boat, but with a slightly different flavor to it, is Bernie Sanders, who in some ways is having to pay for his crimes of 2016. He has established himself as this incredibly liberal, dare I say, leftist candidate. I mean, we saw John Hickenlooper attempting to distance himself from socialism all night. I think that was the thing he probably talked the most about, was how the Democratic Party should not fall under socialism. It rang a little too much of the 1950s McCarthy era, but we'll leave politics back there where it was. But Bernie Sanders right now is having to face the problem of, okay, we saw him in 2016. We know who he is from 2016. He has effectively shifted a lot of the conversation over to where he is in terms of Medicare for all, in terms of free higher education, and at least in some capacity. Everyone seems to have a flavor of Bernieism, but he's slowly declining in the polls. He's losing ground to people like Elizabeth Warren, who are seen as the more favorable Democratic candidate. So overall, how do you feel like he did tonight, especially when combating a little bit between Joe Biden and Kirsten Gillibrand?
I think Bernie Sanders talked the third most tonight, and that was, I think relevant because he was very prevalent in a lot of this conversation. And I think one of the most telling things that you brought up is the fact that I can't think of how many times tonight someone mentioned Bernie's plan or something like Bernie's bill or the bill that Bernie wrote or sponsored or that kind of thing. And I think that that's very telling and remarkable of the job that Bernie Sanders has done in making the Democratic Party more basically more progressive and more outwardly progressive,
Right.
and not being
Yeah.
ashamed of that. And I think that that is a great service that he has done to the party, especially when you think about it comes from the man who seems to want to distance himself and attack the established the Democratic Party for coming off as establishment or any of that kind of thing. And yes, well, I mean, the party has a lot of issues. One of my largest issues that I've always taken with Bernie is the fact that it seems that he always bites the hand that feeds him, in the way that he would be absolutely nothing without Democrats in this country. And I think that it's important that you, in some ways, this is also just my, I think it comes from a very, I don't know, nuanced position of being someone who's very active in the party, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to run for the nomination of a party that that you also outwardly attack and that kind of thing. It just it seems kind of, I mean, granted, like it's a very politically savvy move, and I think a lot of his supporters really like that, but I think that it's really hard to continue that kind of momentum and talk about this talk about this his revolution and that kind of thing, and that vision is, it seems to it's a lot like I don't know, it seems a lot like it's better off being a campaign and a go vision to rally around, rather than a policy to govern by. And
right,
it almost,
I think a big part of that was illustrated by one of his responses was, what's the first thing you can do in office? And he talked about this revolution, not so much some specific policy, but just this more broad general idea of a revolution. I think that's encapsulated a lot in the point you're making.
Yeah. And I think that I think that the weakest position for Bernie this evening was when Rachel Maddow, our Lord and Savior, aka Joan of Arc, had a direct quote from Bernie Sanders, and brought that up, and he said that she's mischaracterizing him, and she was like, it's a direct quote and that kind of thing, and that was the kind of behavior that we've seen from Joe Biden when he's faced with some serious confrontation, and I saw that from Bernie, and I think that it is one of the weakest. It was one of the most telling weaknesses of Biden and Sanders' candidacy, is the fact that they largely, in some ways, I'm not sure that this is the case, but it comes off as almost a hubris towards not wanting to face that kind of direct criticism. And I think that both Biden and Sanders are the oldest members, I think, of the Democratic Party running, and both of them have served in public office for a long time. And while Sanders has held some of the same, his beliefs, I think, have changed in on some regards, in some ways, and they've developed and that kind of thing. And I think that's the same for Biden. But I think that it's very interesting to see how far Bernie has come from being the mayor of a small town in Vermont that wanted to nationalize, the banking industry and a bunch of other things in the United States, to the candidate that he is now. And I think that Sanders did he did an okay job tonight, but there was nothing new, and there was nothing that really spoke more. Nothing spoke to me more than more than his message did back in 2016. And now that message is adopted by 90% of the Democrats running for the presidency, I think it ultimately, I think that he is a victim of his own success back then, and that I think now that I kind of question, not so much question why he's up there, but I question now because the role he took in 2016 is very different than now. And I think it's interesting to see that, back then in 2016, it was, him versus an establishment Democrat. And now it's him versus a bunch of different Democrats, and many of which are, many of which are either just as progressive or slightly less progressive, but some of those individuals are also more ethnically and
Well, they're more diverse.
exactly, that's what I'm saying. But I'm also saying that
yeah.
the people are also more diverse and actually have more to say about different parts of the big tent party. And so I think that I don't know. I think that how his campaign plays out will be very interesting, and I think that especially when you consider that Bernie Sanders, I guess his perceived largest opponent right now is Elizabeth Warren. I am not sure that definitively that he could say that he did. I don't think I could say definitively that he did better than she did.
Yeah.
At least.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because his perceived largest opponent is Elizabeth Warren, but that's for second place.
Yeah.
Because neither of them have the numbers to beat Joe Biden right now. So if we're looking at Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders next to each other in this debate as the, again, far and above front runners so far, I was largely unimpressed. There was no new information that we got from either of them. You mentioned earlier the tone simply was different between the first night and the second night of debates. And I think that was kind of encapsulated in the fact that there was nothing new that we learned about Joe Biden or about Bernie Sanders, whereas Elizabeth Warren presented information that she needed to present. She gave people a better understanding of who she is as a candidate. Now, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden aren't plagued by the fact that people don't really know who they are aside from one small tangential reference. But they didn't take the opportunity to lean into that. Now, we can't say that same thing when it comes to our next tier of candidates, which, we have California Senator Kamala Harris. We have South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I'm going to go ahead and throw in New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand into this grouping as three people who, they're largely the next tier down in the polls, but I think they're people that made the most of their opportunity. I think more so than anybody else tonight was Kamala Harris. Was Kamala Harris's night. She showed off her skills as a lifelong prosecutor, but and you saw some of that kind of going after Joe Biden, which she saw what she needed to do was she needs to prove to everybody that she can win the party's nomination over Joe Biden before she can take on Trump. I think she did kind of two birds in one stone, but she again took this opportunity of, I now have this microphone in front of me. I'm going to raise some poignant issues that aren't covered under a Bernie Sanders and aren't covered under a Joe Biden plan. Though again, a lot of the conversation was less substantive, I think she got people's attention. I think Pete Buttigieg was largely deferred in a lot of this debate. He had a couple of good moments in there talking about the recent turmoil going on in South Bend in terms of policing and racial disparity in police shootings and police brutality and things like that. I think that was a great moment for him and where his campaign's at right now, though it didn't really translate into the debate overall very well. And then Kirsten Gillibrand got her name out by being one of the people who was probably the most interruptive tonight. So again, we have this trend of New Yorkers being the ones to butt in. But again, she has the most to win from that because she's the furthest away in the polls, at least in terms of these three. So of these three, of Harris, Buttigieg, and Gillibrand, who did you feel like took away the right things from tonight, and who has more to be desired from the next debate?
One thing that I, to get into this, I think that the biggest tragedy of tonight's debate as compared to yesterday was that yesterday the candidates actually had time to tell their story and tell the story that will convince Americans to make them the next president. And tonight I did not feel as if many candidates were actually able to do that. and I think that is one of the largest, but I think the candidate that I think did a very good job of that was Kamala Harris, especially. I think that she killed it tonight in that regard.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Going forward.
Gotcha. I think that, ultimately, I think Harris did probably the best job tonight overall. This was her night to shine. She killed it in regards to taking Biden to task, to being very vocal about not only her experiences, but, she was a candidate that seemed very relatable. And I think largely that was something that was, very strong. I think that she was a passionate candidate. She was up there doing all the right things. I liked what I saw. Now, I think that there is a danger in being too critical of Biden. I think that you don't face that as much with Bernie, but I think that, and this could just be that this kind of this thought that the moderate American independent is most likely to vote for a Biden-like individual, but I think that if that assumption is true, I think that there is a danger. But I think largely that what she did tonight was show her skills, and I think she did a phenomenal job. Gillibrand, I was very impressed with for the first half of the debate, especially. I thought that she took no shit and was all about making her voice heard, and I think that she largely has a voice that should be heard. And I think that her opinions and her policies in regards to women's reproductive health and the providing rights to women and that kind of her stuff on immigration, her very much more humanitarian policies, I thought were a shining point for her especially, and that I want more of, and I think that was something I was impressed by. However, I think in the second half she fell off a bit more, and we didn't hear as much from her, and I think that that's room for improvement. Pete was the fourth most vocal candidate up there, and I thought that Pete, for the first half, did not do as well, and I think that he needed to warm up a bit. And I think that once he was able to kind of dip into his military service, more of his personal story, him, his talking about his marriage, being decided by only one vote at the Supreme Court, I thought was very important. However, I think that you saw some weaknesses, especially in that first half, being exposed by simply, I just wasn't impressed with a lot of what he had to offer in regards to healthcare and other messages. And there was I think his campaign put out some kind of quote that was like a healthier citizens of America make America healthier. And it's like, well, no shit. Like, it seems like I was just not impressed with some of that stuff. But I think that he really was able to, especially near the end, was to really sell his story. And I thought his closing statement was probably the best one of both nights. And so I was impressed by that. And I think that he is this phenomenon that has kind of come out of the age of social media, and he has a phenomenal social media team. It's impressive. And I think that machine has gotten him thus far. And I think that right now, when this the debate is very televised and showy and that kind of thing, I think that he's going to do well. But I think the largest criticism that anyone can that easily lob at him are the lack of experience that he has had, and the fact that his candidacy is largely based upon messaging and vision, and less so policy. And I think that that's something that he still has a lot of room to work on and that kind of thing. And I think that that's something that can be developed and honed. But I think that the game really changes once you get to Iowa, and the moment you start, having to deal with caucusing and meeting. I think a part of Iowans' pride is the fact that they never make up their minds until like the last moment about who they're going to vote for, and you can never be too sure. And I think that that's something that is really going to that he's going to really have a challenge with, because I think that while Iowa is far from the most progressive state It's it's an older population in a large, very rural in many areas, and I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how his message and his likability is going to be able to play with that demographic. And while ultimately, that is not the demographic of the country, what it is though is a benchmark for how the rest of the primary is going to play out, because it doesn't matter how much people in California like your policy. If people in if Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina don't like it, then you're fucked for the rest of the primary. So,
well, it's interesting because during all the breaks, they brought up the electoral map that Donald Trump used to win, and they acknowledged the fact that Hillary Clinton won with the popular vote of over 3 million, but you have to win in the right places. And so I think our electoral math, especially from the Clinton era, is worth reevaluating, because obviously they built what they thought was a winning map, which turned out to just be horribly inaccurate at the end of the day. When you look at the electoral victory that Donald Trump took over Hillary Clinton, it wasn't really as close as it should have been, especially, again, considering the popular vote.
Yeah.
So the polling that we're doing is, at least in one sense, counterproductive, because polling is a popularity contest, whereas the Electoral College is it's a marksmanship competition of who can win in the right places, who's the most accurate in deliberately crafting a message for the right places. And I think these debates are going to help us, A, with the nomination in terms of figuring out who we want our candidate to be, but B, also being that it's going to produce a candidate who has a message, whose backstory lends itself to the message of the Democratic Party in America and the American voter that wants and needs to be heard by someone that isn't Donald Trump. So I think this is a great opportunity for candidates to be learning that, and the American people to be realizing that we need to be imposing that on these people. So when we have these younger candidates coming in, and I'll say just about everybody on the stage is a younger candidate, save for Sanders, Biden, and probably John Hickenlooper. I'll be fascinated to go back in time 6 months from now or 12 months from now when we're getting closer to election and see where these candidates were now and where they are there, whoever our nominee ends up being.
Yeah.
And so as we transition, we covered the first 5. I'm going to go ahead and just put the last 5 into what I'm going to consider the third tier of the debate tonight, because they largely either failed to speak up on, I won't even say a lot of the issues, but a lot of the overarching points, or they are simply one-issue candidates, as we kind of pointed out in the last debate. And this last tier is comprised of California Congressman Eric Swalwell, former tech CEO Andrew Yang, Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, and author Marianne Williamson. These 5 candidates struggled to get some elbow room in terms of what the debate offered for them. However, each of them made, I think, poignant points to their overarching agenda, some more so than others. I think the second debate will yield them a little bit more time to get in some of the more craft points, but they have a lot of work to do between now and the third debate if they hope to make that stage. So of those 5 I just named, who did you think excelled tonight, and who were you disappointed by?
I'm gonna start off with I guess the saddest, the most sad moment that I think that occurred in the entire debate, which is the absolute, just this is awful. And this is the one thing that I really like. I very much am very happy that we have 25 good Democrats wanting to become the next president. And I don't think, for the most part, that is a bad thing. However, I think when you have a candidate that gets less than 3 minutes on stage, I think that led to speaking time of less than 3 minutes on stage, I think that it is a massive disservice to their supporters, the people that donate to them, the people that believe in them, and for the effort that they have taken to actually get on that stage. And while I'm not here saying that all 25 deserve a spot always, but I think that it is a robbery that if you have a candidate that meets that kind of criteria, that then speaks for less than 3 minutes, that it is a it's embarrassing. And I think that it's quite wrong. And I would say that about every single candidate up there. And most unfortunately, it is probably my favorite candidate, Andrew Yang, who spoke for 2 minutes and 58 minutes. 2 minutes and 58 seconds. But I mean, and this is the thing. Like, I'm sad that Yang didn't speak much, but regardless, even if like Hickenlooper or Williamson or Delaney spoke for that little time, it would be sad. It would be
Right.
a disappointment. And I think that every one of them has their own message that they're trying to prove and that kind of thing. And I would largely classify Andrew Yang as a candidate that has a specific agenda that he is trying to push, and that's not to become president, but that's to talk about universal basic income. And I personally think it's a great idea, and I think that listening to him speak upon the issue, I think that it's one of the most visionary policy proposals that any of the Democratic candidates could take. And
Certainly the most ambitious.
Largely, I would say him and Jay Inslee are the two that have the most ambitious and progressive vision for what their policy is that they are in the race for. And so I think that the fact that he was able to speak so little, and that the most defining aspect of his performance tonight was the fact that he wasn't even wearing a tie. And I think I think it's sad, and I hope to see more from him, and I surely hope he sticks around. And on this note, because I got to talk about this. So I have for a long time tried to break through on Twitter and become relevant. And I largely I've given up on it in some regards. But tonight there was it was about maybe like 30-40 minutes into the debate. There was a poll that Bloomberg put out that was like, who of Williamson, Swalwell, Hickenlooper, and Yang, like, who do we want to hear more from? Because they've spoken the least thus far. And I voted Yang, and then I replied, Yang Gang. And I was one of like the first people to reply. I think it might have been the first one. And since then, I have been getting one like, and like one every like 10 likes. I'm getting a follower, and this has been going on since this happened. This is like we're talking like 2 hours ago. It is insane. Anyways, it has been very funny. But the Yang Gangers are a dangerous folk.
You talk about the force of a social media campaign with Pete Buttigieg, and like Andrew Yang is probably the evidence of how far social media can carry you in terms of a presidential campaign that really comes out of nowhere. Your point and the overarching point of we have some candidates who are here for one issue. Andrew Yang could easily fall under this characterization, except for the fact that he is also putting out a bunch of policy on a lot of other things. But it seems to me that his number one thing is universal basic income.
Oh, yeah.
As a lot of candidates focus their policy around climate change and how their proposals to deal with climate change will lead to things like economic growth and lead to things like improved health care because the ancillary effects of it. His message is that universal basic income will deal with a lot of these, even down to his dealing with climate change is focused around that somehow in some way that he wasn't able to extrapolate on.
No.
That really is, again, as you mentioned, I think it would be great if we could have all 25 candidates up on stage, but this is not the forum that allows them to really convey that message to the American public. I think John Hickenlooper and Michael Bennet suffered from a similar fate, and I have no idea what they were doing up on stage. If I didn't know any previous information about Andrew Yang, I would feel similarly.
Oh, yeah.
I have also no idea what Marianne Williamson was doing up there.
Yep.
Eric Swalwell was lucky enough to get in his point about gun reform, but for the four of the candidates I just mentioned, this was not their time to shine. they did not have the opportunity to cover the breadth of the complexity of their policies and why they're running for president. And I think that they'll be itching for more screen time going forward.
Yeah. So let's talk about Michael Bennett and Hickenlooper. So our Colorado boys.
Yeah.
So
I don't. Yeah, go ahead. I don't have anything to say about them.
Yeah, that's the thing is like I wasn't terribly. I thought Hickenlooper had his moment in the sun was basically being like, hey, like we should not say socialism but still pass progressive policies,
Right.
And that's all he had to offer. That was about it. And I think that Bennett really went toe to toe with he was like, oh, the top three, I'm going to somehow choose to disagree with you, yet the whole time it seemed like he was praising Bernie Sanders' plans. And that was about it.
Yeah.
Bennett was, I was surprised at the deep voice. It seemed like his voice did not match the rest of his body. And so that's all, honestly, all I got to say about them. You want to do Swalwell, and then we'll end with Williamson before we do our hot takes?
Yeah, and kind of to this overarching point, I mean, I assumed that Hickenlooper and Bennett were in this race for Inslee reasons, insofar as saying that, hey, we are politicians from blue/purple states who are passing these progressive policies. I think that's what they were attempting to communicate. I think Jay Inslee did it much more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Hickenlooper got a couple of words in there edgewise about being a governor of a purple state and being the first state to legalize marijuana, and so gets the point across that way. But I just don't know what differentiates him from Bennett or from Inslee or for any other of the white male executives running for office. And I think he has a lot of ground to cover before he really breaks through that in and of itself.
Yeah, I largely think that because, historically, governors have done better in presidential, candidacies than senators or representatives and that kind of thing. But I'm not sure that has really been the case for this time around. And I think that thus far the one that has done it best has been Inslee, of these, less than 1% polling candidates that have held extremely important positions of power within the United States. And so I think that he has been the model to follow, because I was not impressed with Hickenlooper or Bennett.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the last couple of candidates we have, Marianne Williamson. I think it was entertaining to have her there. I think that we probably would have benefited more from having Bullock. I think we would have benefited more from having someone who's a little more entrenched in the political system with a better idea of combating not only Donald Trump but also a Republican Senate than we need to love against hate. Though I think that's a fine message to send. It's probably one that's a little out of touch with where American politics are at right now. So Marianne Williamson being up there, she qualified for it, and that's good on her and her ability to raise funds and receive some polling, and democracy's alive and well, as evidenced by her presence. But I think that contributing to the conversation, she really gave little. Meanwhile, Eric Swalwell was the only one advocating for truly a progressive gun policy in terms of buying back assault rifles and really making it illegal to purchase or own them.
Yeah.
I think that's one of those conversations that contributes to the overarching dialogue of how far we should be pushing on gun control legislation and not just being satisfied with some moderate gains. I think we need to be advocating for that far progressive stance, and then only if the best we can do is moderate reform, then we'll start there and we'll continue that way. But I think the rest of the candidates being reluctant to offer such a progressive policy is a little behind the times and where the Democratic Party should be, much less where it's at right now.
Starting with Swalwell, I think that it is notable that I think his big issue is guns, and I think that he did a fine job of making that known tonight. I think that he's still too much of a presidential candidate and not enough of an issue candidate to really make much of an impact in that regard. He spoke the second least the entire night, but I think that his presence was much more felt than any of the other lower level candidates. And I think that one of the best things that he has done in his time in office is constantly appear on news outlets. I watched like the last fourth of the debate with my mother being present, and the moment he started talking, she was like, "Wait a second, I know him. He's on like MSNBC and CB, and CNN all the time. I love him." And I'm like, "Ah, yes, that's partly melted Kendall is the best." And largely, I think Swalwell is a very good representative, and I think that he has a great message about guns and diversity to offer, and I think that he just doesn't have the momentum behind him and that kind of progress to really make it known, and I think that that's a shame. However,
that of course could change, but
it could. And I think
tonight was not an indication of that changing.
No, and the biggest thing, it's like I don't think that I think it's a discredit to say that a candidate that didn't, that obviously like Swalwell, Williamson, Hickenlooper, and Yang are not going up there expecting to talk a ton or basically have star moments or be like the kind of star of the debate. They are not expecting to do that, and so I think that as long as they don't do as long as they significantly don't fuck up and just don't tank their candidacy outright, I think that their ability to kind of surf by for a while is not ultimately. I don't see it as a negative, and so I think that there's definitely room for growth in that regard. Now, Marianne Williamson, I think, has a phenomenal story to sell. She has been an extremely successful author. And largely a spiritual and self-help kind of author that has taken lots of, that has been her primary focus. She was a major advocate for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And I think that she is a big ideas-oriented individual, and I think that she's always been that way. However, I don't think that this democratic stage and this democratic field is a place for anyone outside of politics at the time, and especially people that don't make themselves policy oriented individuals. Like, I think that while Andrew Yang is an outsider, I think that he has made himself far more policy oriented than Williamson, and I think his something like 3,800 policies that he's put up on his website.
Yeah, it's been quite a few.
Oh, yeah, tons. And among those, I'm just gonna stan him real quick, are ending daylight savings, because we fucking love that. And just things that that are not exactly massive, things that we talk about in politics. On debate stages, no one is going to ask Joe Biden whether or not he thinks that, that daylight savings should be a thing, or that, I don't know, think about something else stupid like.
Well, someone will ask him.
I mean, someone better. But I think that that will not be something that is broadcast to the entire public, and so anyways, just appreciation for that. But anyways, that wraps up our analysis of the candidates.
Yeah, that was about as in-depth as it needed to be, considering the information we were given tonight.
Yeah, which was so much less than yesterday.
Right. Far less substantive.
Yeah. So, anyways, shall we give our hot takes?
Oh yeah.
All right, and I'll lead you off with this one. So, okay. All right, give me your hot take on Mr. Michael Bennet.
Colorado Senator Michael Bennet. My hot take for him is, which one was Jay Inslee again?
Yep.
What about you? What you got for Michael Bennet?
The most impressive thing about his performance tonight is his deep voice not matching the rest of his body.
Fair enough.
All right, and Kirsten Gillibrand.
I think, nevertheless, she persisted, has never applied more to anybody that wasn't Elizabeth Warren in this particular circumstance. She made herself known and felt on the stage, and she's going to need to continue to do that if she wants to make it to night 3.
Yes. Man, my hot take on Kirsten Gillibrand is the fact that I never has starting your presidential candidacy by speaking in front of Trump Tower ever been more fitting. Like, goddamn, there's serious energy coming off of
Put the
of
New
Gillibrand.
Yorkers all on the stage together.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Man. All right. Williamson?
Marianne Williamson. Didn't she write Harry Potter? That's what I got. That's literally all I have for her.
Largely, I think that Marianne Williamson would be the best candidate to put up against Donald Trump if we wanted to see Donald Trump have no fucking idea how to debate the candidate. Man, she would destroy him in any debate
That's
that they
fair.
had, because he just,
What angle do you take?
how do you fight with that? I mean, it would just be the most sexist, just like garbage just spewing out of him, because that's about the only thing that he would be able to discern from her positive messages.
Yeah, that would be completely wild.
Yeah. All right. Give me Buttigieg.
Buttigieg needs to lose the boyish charm and gain a little bit of aggression if he wants to gain headway through the debates.
Yeah. I think that Buttigieg is if Buttigieg was a straight Republican, he would be the Romney that Mitt was most proud of.
He would be Paul Ryan. If he was a straight conservative, he would be Paul Ryan. I want no absolutely.
Like, let's take note. If Pete Buttigieg was a heterosexual Republican, he would be one of the largest stars of their party.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
He's everything that a progressive Democrat should be, at least in broad strokes, and he's no nonsense brass tacks kind of guy.
Yep. Oof. All right. Hickenlooper.
Which one's Jay Inslee again? That's what I got.
Yep. No, that's fair. I think he is the best Democratic candidate. If the race was about turning your name into a cereal brand. A good old bowl of Hickenloops.
Hickenlooper. Thank God.
Yep. All right. Swalwell.
Guns, baby. Stop giving guns to babies. Stop shooting babies with guns. Eric Swalwell.
I think Eric Swalwell is the presidential candidate that, after being left in the sun and his packaging in the back of a Walmart was blessed by by his fairy godmother to become not a slightly melting Ken doll, but a very, very accomplished, absolutely great representative of California. And I have the same criticism of Tulsi Gabbard as I do of Eric Swalwell, and the same question.
Wow.
No, I have the same question for Swalwell as I do Gabbard, as in, why in God's name would you want to go to Washington when you could stay in the place that you already represent?
Yeah, for real. That's a good point.
I'm like, you represent SoCal. Like, enjoy yourself.
No, it's an awful place. It's a terrible place.
All right.
It'll cost me an election one day, but it's a terrible place.
All right. Let's do Harris, and then we'll. Or no.
Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Let's do Yang first, and then we'll get to our top 3.
Andrew Yang. Yang Gang. Hashtag Yang Gang. UBI. Hashtag Yang Gang. That's what I got. That's my tweet.
I think that, man, Andrew Yang is. I think that his. Honestly, like, I don't even know. I'm just sad that he's not loved by
everyone. Tonight would have been his time to shine, and he largely let it kind of slide by.
Yeah, well,
if he makes it to the next debate, I think he needs to really take that opportunity to make a name for himself. Otherwise, he'll have done himself a great disservice.
Yeah, I bet you're talking too much politics right now. It's not a hot take.
Fair enough.
I think the hottest take from Andrew Yang is the fact that he took a economic policy started that began in Iran and made it one of the most progressive, fastest growing political economic stimulus ideas of the 21st century.
Fair enough.
All right, give me Harris.
Kamala Harris. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Let her tear Joe Biden to shreds. Hashtag second school district in America. Hashtag busing. Hashtag I just really want to see her debate Donald Trump. I really do.
Yep. I honestly, her debating any other candidate on stage is the only form of police brutality that I'm here for.
Kamala's got the receipts.
Damn straight. All right. Let's do Sanders.
Bernie Sanders. I wasn't that big of a fan in 2016. Not that big of a fan in 2020. Keep on pushing left, but leave some room for somebody else.
Yeah. I think that if Donald Trump's wall at the southern border was a candidate, it would be I'm not going to start with that. No, I'm not going to do that. No. I'm not going to do that.
If it was a fish market in San Francisco.
Also, I'm going to apologize for the hiccups. I don't know what has come over me, but the last 10 minutes of this podcast is just going to be filled with me hiccuping. No. There it is. No, my hot take on Bernie Sanders is I think the hottest thing about the revolution that he has been spouting on about is the 1991 album Purple Rain by Prince and the Revolution.
All right, yeah.
That doesn't make any sense, but I'm gonna go with it.
I'll agree with that. Why not?
Yeah. All right. I don't see I would have hotter takes if I don't know if Bernie presented anything that was worth giving hot takes over. Yeah. That haven't already been given. So, anyways, let us end with the Democratic frontrunner, Uncle Joe.
Joe Biden. I didn't want to like you. I still don't like you. But at the end of the day, I would vote for you over Donald Trump. And I think that's the thing you're banking on.
Yep. I think that my hot take of Joe Biden is the fact that no one has ever looked better in a pair of aviators double fisting vanilla ice cones. And I think that if that honestly is what it takes to get this nation back on track, then God damn it, I'm going to take a triple scoop of vanilla ice cream and I'm going to pop on those shades, and you're damn right I'm going to go to the polls and vote for him over Donald Trump.
We're a bunch of fucking neo-lib globalist cucks, aren't we?
I'm just saying he's about the he's about the I don't know. He's the candidate that I know that I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't
but
know.
He's what we got right now, and that's all we can.
Yeah.
That's all we can hope for 16 months out of an election.
To be completely honest, I don't see his lead going anywhere. This is my prediction. I don't think his lead will go anywhere, and I think that the infighting between Harris, Sanders, and Warren for that piece of the pie might just be the death of all of them. So,
well, now the only place he has to go is down. So it's going to be on him to hold it.
That's fair, but I think
and we'll see if he can.
Yeah. I think that it'll be very telling to see whether or not when people start dropping out where that disseminates to. So
couldn't agree more.
Time will tell, but I can't believe that it's up to Iowans to decide this.
God.
Ugh.
God bless Iowa. God bless God's country in the Midwest.
And God
bless the 36%.
Oh, I was going to say our troops, but that works too.
Yeah, that's true. God bless our troops.
God, yeah. Anyways, guys, I certainly hope that you have enjoyed Brett and I's breakdown of this latest Democratic debate, and we certainly look forward to giving you all of our hot takes and absolutely useless opinions on the next one. So, anyways, this has been episode 2 of season 3 of the 36%. Next episode, we will be getting back on track to all of our normal shenanigans, talking about news from all over the country, all over the world, and most importantly, all over the United States. So
stay tuned, everybody.
Hell yeah. And anyway, so closing messages, if you have disagreed with any of our hot takes, as I know that many of you Bernie or bust individuals have.
There's no reason any of you should have. They were all completely accurate and scientifically backed.
You can always tweet at us at the 36%. You can even email us, or if you have our numbers, text us.
You can literally just.
But please don't do that. Make it a public thing. But anyways, tell your friends.
Make us skeptical.
Tell your friends. Hit us up on Twitter. Now that apparently I'm famous in the Yang Gang community.
Now that Adam's Twitter famous.
I'm still waiting on that blue check mark.
God, aren't we all?
Yep. So, anyways, everyone, I hope you've enjoyed. But always give us feedback because we enjoy it. Anything that we can do to improve the episodes, we'll always do because ultimately we do this for you, and not our desire to hear ourselves speak. If that was the case, Brett and I would probably do it a little more often than we do anyways. So
now that this outro's been 25 minutes.
Yeah, I guess without further ado, as I hiccup.
That brings it to a close.
God damn it, let's end this thing. The 36% was founded, written, and directed by Adam Childers Arnold and Brett Combs.
Music in this episode was provided by Purple Planet. You can go ahead and check them out at www.purple-planet.com.
The presenting sponsor of the 36% is Avian Apparel.
Our audio editing for this episode was done by the inimitable Adam Childers Arnold.
And our ukulele muse, as always, is Adam California.
Our lack of research and organization was brought to you in part this week by Benjamin Sherman.
And as always, absolutely none of the scheduling was done by Yorkie March to the Sea Sherman.
Our cover art, as per usual, was provided by the wonderful Christian Ferguson.
Yes, and our music editing was done by the one and only Burnt Crumbs.
And we would just like to offer a special thanks to the 10 Democrats who took to the stage tonight in this debate to further our cause of democracy, our battle against our president, Donald Trump, and, of course, our failing fight against climate change that will probably kill us all in the next 12 to 30 years.
And also, as always, our condolences and RIP to the 5 candidates that did not make it. And the fact that any of you are still in the race is bewildering. So, on that final hot take of the episode.
So thank you, listener dear, so much for listening. As always, I'm Brett.
And I'm Adam. And this has been the 36%.
The 36%. I'm sure that wasn't it all together, but you know what? We're going to deal with it.
Yep, that'll work. It will work.
All right, I'm cutting my recording.
Yep.